Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this quick takes session. So in this quick takes session, I'm going to give a demo on how to leverage shared Azure SPO containers. So let's get started. So in this demo, I'm going to give a little bit of background of SPO migration methods. Then I'm going to explain what a shared container is, what are the requirements, and how is the process flow, and how we can configure content matrix to leverage shared containers. So as we all know, CSOM API was a major migration method to SharePoint Online, and CSOM API basically gives you access to a subset of SharePoint Server Object Model. It uses a client context which manages the interaction between client applications and SharePoint Server. And the other way is to use a REST API, which is nothing but a WCF data service where you can query SharePoint using HTTP requests. Though CSOM and REST APIs are both good in terms of functionality, the main drawback or a challenge was that they're not geared for large migrations. You can't basically migrate a large volume of data to SharePoint Online from performance standpoint. So Microsoft built a new API which uses Azure pipeline method. So this new API, we're not transacting directly with SharePoint Online. We're also transacting through the Azure pipeline. So this new API basically initially started off based on private Azure storage containers. Private Azure storage containers are something that you go create in your Azure portal, and it's based off Azure subscription, and you pay for the storage account. But recently, Microsoft came up with shared SPO containers which are free for use. You don't need a subscription. You don't have to pay for the storage at all. So in this demo, we're going to discuss more about how to leverage shared containers. As you see on my next slide, these shared containers are shared across tenancies and are provisioned based on tenant-specific information. What Content Matrix does is, like, we are going to encrypt the data as we push them to shared containers, because obviously they're shared, and it's always good to encrypt the data when putting all the data out there on a shared container. So let's take a look at the requirements. As you can see, I've listed all the requirements of a private Azure storage here. Basically, if you want to leverage a private Azure storage, you're going to have an Azure storage account of general type. You're going to have a local temp storage, which is like a folder on your machine that runs Content Matrix. And you're also going to configure the storage connection string into the environment settings file. But if you want to leverage Azure storage containers, we do not need a private storage account. So I'm striking that off here, as you can see. We don't have to configure anything into the environment settings file in terms of the Azure storage connection string. So all you need is the local temp storage, which is nothing but a folder on your machine that runs Content Matrix. So let's take a look at the process flow and let's see where Content Matrix fits into the migration. The first step is to create the list or library, and that's going to use CSOM. As you can see, all the steps are marked here. Number one is to create the target list or library structure with CSOM, and then number two is to create the package, basically. So we're going to create a package. We're going to package the manifest and the blobs together, and third step, we're going to push them to the Azure blob storage. Now, if you're leveraging a shared container, we automatically upload the packages to the shared containers. And then the fourth step is to create a migration job. This is nothing but submitting a migration job. So we're basically asking SharePoint, we're informing SharePoint that, okay, I've uploaded a package, please start the migration process. After step 4, as you can see, all the communication happens between SharePoint and Azure, and live updates will be written to the queues. So what Content Matrix does is it keeps reading from the queue, and it keeps checking for the status of the migration based off what is written to the queue. All right, so on this slide, I'm showing you the interaction that happens between SBO and Azure. Once we create the migration job, once we submit the migration job, as you can see, the content front ends will be basically handling the migration job. So, and as you can see here, there's a timer job that runs on the Azure infrastructure that sends these jobs to the respective bots, which then start reading from the Azure storage, and they'll start writing to SharePoint Online. It uses a combination of DB writing methods and a combination of server object model, Prime API, like that. So this is how the migration happens in the back end. So all Content Matrix does is it builds the package, it uploads the package to Azure storage or a shared storage, and it tells SharePoint to start the migration process. And that's when SBO and Azure will communicate, and they'll finish the migration, and it writes the log and updates to the queue, and Content Matrix reads it back from the queue. So this is this slide shows all the steps and the process of migration. So as you can see, list or library structure gets created, package is created, gets uploaded, and we do one CSOM call to submit the job. So let's take a look at how we can configure Content Matrix to use shared SBO containers. The first step is to remove the Azure storage connection string. If you've configured Content Matrix to use private storage, go ahead and remove the value inside Upload Manager Azure storage connection string inside environment settings file. I'll show you the file right away. As you can see here, there's no value inside Upload Manager Azure connection string. And this used to be your private storage account name and key before, but we don't need that anymore. It's been removed, and that's the only configuration. And besides that, in the UI, inside the job configuration, we'll have to select these two options inside List Content Options tab. and that's going to be, I'll show you real quick. So you can see here under list content options, I've selected both use Azure by SPO container and encrypt options. So that's the only configuration that's needed. Let's take a look at the next slide. Now, the way we're encrypting at the moment is we're hard coding the AES 256 key. Now, if you want, you can replace it with any custom key. So all you have to do is you'll have to change one of the entries inside the environment settings file, and the entry is going to be this blob storage encryption key file. So if you want to use a custom encryption key, I'll show you the folder where the file gets stored. So this is the location where the encryption key exists. Basically, it's a .dat file. It's inside C drive, program data, metalogics, complementary SharePoint edition. So at the moment, we're supporting it for SharePoint edition and FileShare edition both. So you'll have a key file inside those folders. If you want to use a custom encryption key, you can put that in. You can dump the file here into these folders, and you can modify the file name here accordingly. All right, so I'm going to get started. I'll give you a little demo. I'll run a job, and then I'll go over the questions. You can type in the questions into the questions pane, and I'll read out the questions and I'll answer them. So let's go ahead. This is a basic paste list job. And if you can see here, it's a full migration, and I've selected these two options which are going to internally leverage the Azure SPO containers. So let's go ahead and hit run. For every list, we initialize the Azure Upload Manager class, and you can identify that using this log line that says Azure Upload Manager.initialize. As you can see, my list name is logged in here. It's called Azure Pipeline Demo, and basically, after you see the initialize log line, after you see that, then you start seeing if it's items, you see processing items. If it's documents, you start seeing processing documents. On the right-hand side, I'm showing the sequence of steps. I mean, you can call it the Azure Pipeline Batch Lifecycle. So it starts off with the Azure Upload Manager initialization. Then it reads all the files and starts batching them. I'll upload the batches. Okay, while that job is running, let's take a look at the questions, because this is going to take a few minutes. All right, so what version of Content Matrix applies, like implemented this? It's a good question. So like, we would recommend you to start using 8103, because it's a bug fixed version. It's the latest and the greatest. So it was initially implemented 8102, but you can start using. It's not available anymore for download, so you'll have to start using 8103. Okay, what's the advantage of using this versus using a temp space as direct upload to Office 365? Okay, so if I understand if I understand it right, you're asking what's the difference between using the network upload and using Azure pipeline migrations. So basically, if you're going to use network upload, there are quite a few challenges. You have to manually build the packages. You have to convert them to SharePoint Online packages, and then you have to submit those jobs. So that's time intensive, and we haven't done a lot of testing on the network upload method, but obviously that's gonna increase the timelines of your projects if you're gonna use the network upload method. Besides that, I'm not sure how the metadata gets handled in general. But if you use a migration tool, if you leverage Azure Pipeline, you can scale up easily. So, and from performance standpoint of view, I haven't seen a major difference in the performance. So, but if you're planning to run a really large migration, I would suggest you do some kind of testing to benchmark the differences in terms of performance. Basically, it's still the Azure storage, so it's gonna give you the same performance in general. So the main advantage of, okay, there was a question about using temp space. Okay, I think I've answered that. Is controlling this function more granularly outside the GUI? Is there more detailed PowerShell documentation? So from PowerShell standpoint, it's going to be exactly the same PowerShell script. It's just that the parameters that you supply to the PowerShell commandlet are going to change. I'll show you real quick how we can generate PowerShell. For people who've been using PowerShell, it's pretty simple here. If you've tried our PowerShell migration techniques, let's take a look. All right, so copy ML SharePoint list. So obviously we're using the same commandlets, just that the parameters are gonna change here. So what you can do is you can generate a PowerShell script and execute it right away, and at the same time you can view the logs here by doing file and refresh. So no additional changes are needed inside PowerShell to get this working. You'll have to configure the job, select the options, and then you'll have to generate the script and run it. Oh, that's a good question. Okay, sure. We're gonna discuss with the team to see how best we can provide a documentation that explains all the parameters that are available. Okay, I have a question. Okay, so there's a question about SharePoint 2007 to 2007 migrations. So this demo doesn't cover any specific aspects of 2007 migrations. We're discussing about SharePoint Online migrations only, because Azure Pipeline is geared for SharePoint Online migrations. It's an API that lets you migrate to multi-tenant environments. Yeah, so sorry about that. So this demo is for SharePoint Online migrations. Yeah, if in future you're planning to migrate to SharePoint Online, you can obviously test this approach. I'm pretty sure you're going to get good results in terms of performance. Okay, so as we can see here, so let's take a look at uploading to Azure. Let's take a look at the shared access signature here. As you can see, this is random. So this is what Microsoft provides. So if you configure your own private Azure storage string inside the environment settings file, say my account is ML Support Central, you'll see mlsupportcentral.blob.core.windows.net. But here it's random. Whatever SharePoint gives us, we write to that location. So, all right. So it's uploading to Azure and it's requesting a migration job. And this as good as the step 4 here. It submits the job. Let's keep going. And then we start reading off the queue. So these are the messages we're getting from the queue. We've queued the job. Then, so we're reading from the queue a message, and that's it. The migration is started, and like that, it keeps going. All right. In addition, you can also take a look at the manifest. You can take a look at the containers here in your local temp storage as well. If you go, let's go inside this container. You can see the batches and the blobs too. We're clearing out, we're removing the blobs as soon as the migration is done. So you have the manifest available for you to take a look if you want. Okay, and with that error, so so I'm reading out a question here. Upload manager, Azure connection is not been defined. So yeah, so it's a good question. One of our clients has a question about this error, which you might see. While running Azure pipeline migrations. Basically, what it says is you do not have a proper Azure storage connection string defined. If we go inside the environment settings file here, so we'll see a blank value for the Azure connection string. Now, if you want to leverage shared storage, obviously you're going to leave that blank, but if you do not select encrypt under list content options, so we're supposed to select both these options. If you do not select encrypt, you might end up seeing that error about the connection string. So please go ahead and make sure you have both the options selected, use Azure and encrypt. Thank you. Okay, so we haven't heard of any quota limits for Azure storage. So the way Content Matrix works is we write to the Azure storage and once the batch gets processed, we go delete the contents of the container. So we're freeing up the space as soon as the job completes. So and obviously there's no quota defined anywhere that I've seen. Okay, do you recommend a practical upload size for a migration by chunks? So upload size. I usually recommend to have a batch size of, say, anywhere less than 100 items. So let's take a look. Azure. So upload manager, batch size threshold, anywhere less than 100. But there have been cases where it's been bumped to 1,000 items, and it still, works. Basically, we're going to package 1,000 items into a single batch. So it depends, like if you, the way you want to build batches, there's no limit, basically. Okay, so in case you're still seeing issues in leveraging shared containers, please go ahead and raise a ticket with MetaLogic support, and we'll be glad to help you in setting that up. Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to end the demo right now. Thanks for joining, and you have a nice day ahead.